Thank you, Alex. Well, let me thank the Startlight Center for Internet Law and Policy for this invitation, and that's a very nice occasion to discuss about media pluralism in the digital economy. Let me first say that I will not talk about everything needs to be discussed on this issue. So let me make clear immediately what I will not discuss. I will not discuss specifically regulation in this case, and I will not discuss competition in my presentation. If you want to raise issues like the DSA, the DMA, we can discuss opinions later in the part of the discussion. I will concentrate instead on what I consider the issue of the digital threats to media pluralism at the present moment, and I will discuss this starting from the demand side, from what I consider the demand side, but then concentrate essentially on the supply side of these threats. I know that the demand side is very important, but I have to make a choice, so I will discuss in this way. Allow me to use slides. I want you to follow this. Then, when we discuss later after the presentation, we won't have any more slides on the. Let's see if we can get. Sorry, this is not working. So it comes. Okay, sorry that this is not working, and I don't want. Okay, I will go with the presentation without the slides. We will talk about it. I will tell you what I want to discuss. Okay, let me say that the issue I want to face is essentially the digital disruption and the media. Let me start from I will start from the demand side threat to pluralism, essentially the disinformation issue, and then I will concentrate on what I consider the supply side threats. That is the role of the platform and the dynamic of the advertising market as the major economic force. Then finally, the final part of my talk will be about how to finance information if we feel that information is a public good. And this will be a sort of consideration that we'll have to discuss. We will look into alternative business models and public financing. Let me start then from the setting the scene with this way to look at demand side and the supply side. Obviously is very common. What is the demand side issue? Well, the demand side issue is essentially that we have an easy and free access to news that poses huge opportunities, obviously, and poses new risks. The risks are essentially on some of the fundamental rights, because we have risks for privacy, for freedom of expression, we have a vulnerability to disinformation, and we have a risk for pluralism of information. And these are the risks we will consider. On the supply side, the situation is a bit, if you want, a bit more understood at this point. We have the fact that the digital platform have disrupted the digital platform business model, so their essence in a way, has disrupted the legacy media industry. And this wouldn't be too important if we didn't think that somehow the media industry, because of the role of journalism in a democratic society as an intermediary between the news and the public, has a decisive role for the good working of democracy. So the question is there an alternative economic model to finance professional journalism at this moment? And this is what I will discuss. Okay, let's start from the demand side. What is new? What is really the issue here? Well, in the last few years, we perceived we start perceiving the downsides of the digital revolution, because at the beginning it was clear that we had a lot of undoubted advantages, also in terms of spreading of information, obviously. But then it arrived the data scandals, the Cambridge Analytica story, the propaganda during the 2016 US election. All these elements provoked concerns regarding disinformation and manipulation of the public opinion. These concerns created a series of studies about the role of disinformation and social media. Clearly, disinformation wasn't invented by social media, but I will come to this in a second. Well, while fake news, political propaganda, misinformation, disinformation are not a novelty, clearly, in a democratic and open society, let's say that at least three elements are consolidated, that we could call demand threats. Okay, the first element, and we will see why, the first element is the fact that we have much more side door than direct access to media. And this is a technological innovation that has changed the way in which people access news. And I will discuss why this is important also on the supply side. The second element is the scale and the spread of disinformation. That is, as we said, is not a novel phenomenon, but is clearly much more spread now and is much more worrisome. And then the third, and this is probably one of the things that we have to accept, is that all the remedies are almost useless. They don't work in this environment. So we have this situation of weakness of alternative tools. Algorithm-driven access to information have substituted direct access in many cases. We have this digital news report of 2019 that says that just 29% of users access a website or an app directly, prefer to access directly. In the example of this study, 55% of the people declare that they prefer to access news through search engines, social media, or news aggregator, 55%. We have a different set of study, unfortunately I cannot show you, but in the NPM 2020, we posed to our local teams the same question, and it came out, we considered a risk, our media pluralism monitor has this risk assessment philosophy, so it's like a traffic light, red, yellow, and green. And we consider red side door access, yellow an equivalent situation, and green a more direct access, a prevalence of direct access. The result is that 18 European countries were red with our 2020 analysis that based on 2018 and 2019, essentially most of continental Europe. In the green, we have only few countries, essentially Northern Europe. Why is side door access a problem? I'll discuss this later. What is the link between algorithm-driven information and information and the information disorder. Well, on this, there is a lot of discussion, as you know, among the students. The main threats that have been listed are for consumption of news through algorithm presentation of news, is about quality versus quantity versus quality of the news. Then there is all this discussion about echo chambers and filter bubbles. Disinformation and hate speech is clearly the other element. But probably the most important one on which there is more consensus is the importance of bot and computational propaganda. The fact that we are in face of something new from this point of view. We don't know enough about the relationship between algorithm-driven news and disinformation, particularly on echo chambers and fake news and their relation. And we have also, I wouldn't say diverging, but not clearly the same answer from very important data-driven studies. For instance, Boshogo 2018 showed that on Twitter, a very important study published on Science, showed that on Twitter, fake news move up to 10 times more quick and deeper than true news. But I have to say that there is a study I just read from Sinelli and Quattrociocchi, 2021, in which they say, looking at different social media, including Twitter, that actually the rapidity of spread of the fake news is the same as the normal news. And then the difference is about different social media in which there is more or less fake news. But anyway, so we still don't know enough. Let's say that, however, certain critical elements are clear. Through access, through algorithms to the news, that means side-door access, we are in a situation of reduced freedom and responsibility of choice. So you are not, it's not like choosing your program, buying your newspaper and so on. You are getting something that somebody else is elaborating. There is less lack of transparency because we don't know exactly how the algorithm proposes the news. Third, there is a very important, and on this I think that there is a major issue, is the exposition to automated content that is clear in this thing. And then probably there is, on this also there is a lot of discussion, a special vulnerability related to poor digital media literacy. Digital media literacy is more difficult than normal media literacy. Okay, this is all I wanted to say on the demand-side threats. There are important demand-side threats. We don't know exactly what are all the elements, and we are still studying it. But we know that some of these elements, algorithm presentation of the news and exposure to bot and computational propaganda, are major elements on which there is, I would say, a convincing word. Let's go to the supply side threats. Well, as you know, traditional media acted as an analogic, most traditional media were sort of, I call an analogic platform, in which they were a platform because they used to be financed through a business model that would exploit network effects. It would link, it was a two-sided model, think to a normal newspaper in which you would link advertisers and readers, and you would finance this analogic platform in this way. And the advertiser was the major financing of the news. Clearly, there was also other relevant form of revenue, paid content, mainly for newspapers and magazines. This was the traditional situation. Then came the digital platform. They are much more sophisticated. They are platform. They are much more sophisticated. I don't spend time to discuss this here. Essentially, for what we are concerned in this discussion, they are they do the same. They sell eyeball attention to advertisers. What are the differences? Well, I would say that there are three differences that are clear. One is that network effects are gigantic. The second is that we have extreme economy of scales. Clearly, media are an industry of economy of scales, but not of the extreme economy of scales that we have with platform. Third, and probably the most important, the most new in a sense, for what we are discussing here today, not for platform in general, is the personal data exploitation that allow micro-target advertising. Clearly, micro-target advertising is superior, strongly superior to the form of advertising that was exploited by the previous platforms. So we have this comparison between traditional media that we could consider analogic platform and digital media platform with all this interaction and these dynamics. Let me go to what is the result of all this in terms of success of the business model. Well, the result, and unfortunately I'm not showing you the slides, but I will tell you the numbers, but are numbers that we all know. Well, these are numbers. The first thing is tech enterprises are the most important and most valuable company in the world at the moment. And the dimension of this difference is striking. If I look at the capitalization, as you always tell us something about the future of companies. So it's a prediction in a sense, because particularly in some of these companies now is less true, but in which capitalization ran far ahead of profit or of revenues. So it's telling something about the future. Well, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and Facebook, I quote this, it's clear that Google and Facebook are the most important platform in terms of digital advertising, but let's quote all four because also Amazon and Microsoft are important or are becoming more important. Well, they are run somehow a capitalization that is in the between 1 and 2 trillion, with Facebook only close to 1 trillion US dollars. Below this, at the level that is below this, we can find the companies that have a mix of entertainment, the traditional companies, let's say, that mix entertainment, news, and other activities that are related to these markets. Companies like Walt Disney or Comcast that have different activities that are important in this area, and they run in a capitalization around 250 and 300 billion. So they are a class below. When you go to traditional media companies, not normal media companies, traditional main media companies, News Corp has a capitalization of 14 billion. The New York Times, 7. So you see, there is another class. And this is the first thing. Then we look at the, if we look at digital advertising revenue, what is happening there? Well, digital advertising revenue is growing very quickly, taking all a big chunk of the cake. Well, the first company in digital advertising market is Google, that now has overcome the barrier of 100 billion, 103 billions in the last year. Then if you look at this list, we have companies, then there is Facebook, Alibaba, Instagram, Amazon, Tencent. I'm reading the first 10. In the first 20, we have other companies. None of the media is in this category, none of what you call traditional media. The first one that I find is, just for a comparison, is the New York Times. The advertising of the New York Times, the advertising revenue of the New York Times was in 2020 about $400 million. Just to compare, in 15 years ago, 2006, the New York Times was above 2 billion. So they have lost from 2 billion to 0.1 billion to 400 million. That's the signal of, and we are talking of the New York Times. So you can imagine what is happening to other newspapers, to other media weaker media than the most important, one of the most important media in the world. We made some quick calculation for what happened to in the largest 5 European selected countries. Offline expenditure decline in the France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and UK from 2012 to 2019 and then 2020, including COVID, we have minus 30%. So the decline in digital advertising market for all the media offline advertising expenditure is minus 30%. In the meantime, online advertising expenditure in the same, from 2012 to 2020 is plus 149%. So you see what is happening is very, very clear. Offline advertising is shrinking and is shrinking quickly, while online advertising is booming, but this online advertising is going mostly to platforms. Okay. Which are the media that suffers more? Well, the media that suffers more, I would have liked to show you a couple of slides. That doesn't matter, but the slides show that for Germany, for instance, United Kingdom, France, all the major European countries, in this diminution of advertising, the 2 media that suffer more, all the traditional media are losing, okay? TV, radio, but the 2 media that are suffering more, that are losing more quickly, are newspapers and magazines. And these are, I have to say, the media in which investigative and quality journalism is traditionally stronger. So the targeting is getting the most qualitative media more than the others. As I mentioned before, there is not only advertising, some media had also the capacity to sell their news. What happened to circulation, to other ways in which a newspaper and magazine, for instance, had some other revenues? Well, we have a sharp decrease in paid circulation, clearly. Germany from 2012 to 2020 has lost more than 6 million copies of circulation, from 18 to 12 million. That means minus 32%, more or less like the offline advertising decrease. In Italy, circulation printed plus digital of daily newspaper went from 4.5 million to 2.9, minus 35% in the same period. So circulation is shrinking at the same rate as advertising, offline advertising is shrinking. Then let me sum up to go to the first part, to the last part of my speech. The digital platform business model has disrupted the way in which we finance traditional media, both on advertising and direct sales. There is a long-term decreasing trend in advertising revenue in all sectors except digital. Okay, but then digital, we saw who is going. The more dramatic decrease is for newspaper and magazines, so the media in which investigative and quality journalism is stronger. And the decline, let me underline this last point, is being accelerated by COVID-19 in 2020. We have the first result of the NPM 2021 that we will publish in a few months, that signaled that the most EU countries, the media industry market revenues decreased more than GDP. So in the crisis of GDP, the revenues of the traditional media decreased more than GDP in most of the countries. Despite a huge demand for news, that is something interesting to consider, okay? So let me come to the last part of my speech, that is about how to finance information if it is a public good. Because if we think that information, I don't discuss the premise here, we are assuming that information is a sort of public good. So how do we finance it if this is the situation? Well, there are alternative business attempts of alternative to the standard advertising-based business model that are considered and they are experimented. One is, again, pay for the news. That is, let's try to pay for the news, for individual pay for access to the news. There are two main ways in the digital world that are the subscriptions and the paywall. These two are ways that have been developed. Then there is another way that is pay for journalism. And pay for journalism means that you have a civil society initiative investing in professional information. This has at least three different characteristics that we are seeing. One is membership, in which you have readers and audience long-term support, two-way knowledge exchange between journalists and members. A relationship that is a long-term relation, let's say. The second is donation, in which readers are asked to contribute to the production cost, is a sort of a way in which news remain freely accessible, but are financed by donations, widespread donations. The third model is philanthropy. Big donors, foundations, civil society organizations finance journalism. All these things, pay for news and pay for journalism, have been experimented in this period. Both in the EU and elsewhere. Some of these models, mainly subscription and paywall, rely, however, on a rebound of the willingness to pay for the news. But how much is the willingness to pay for the news? And that's what I come back to when I was discussing direct access versus side door access to the news. Well, the rebound is not there for the moment, at least. Or at least, let's say that is very small. In 2019, in 2015, the willingness to pay for news was around 10% of a sample. Now, the digital news reports in 2020 had an estimation that was 13%. So there is a small rebound, but very, very limited. Obviously, countries are very different here. UK is 7%, US is 20%, Norway is 42%. So there is also country difference that are important. It's too early to assess the effect of COVID-19 on these elements, on this attempt to alternative models. The first impression is that subscription and voluntary contribution perform better than the old advertising-based model. The crisis, that these things are kind of supporting the crisis better than the advertising model, in which the shrinking of the advertising is accelerating because also of the general crisis, the general economic crisis. Okay. One word more on the direct access news. Why direct access to the news favors the paid model? Well, there are obviously clear evidence here. Direct access is greater in countries that have more willingness to pay for the news. We have really, if you put the countries on, you do a regression and you see how is the proportion that prefer direct access and the people that are paying for the news, clearly you have a direct proportion on this indirect relation. So we are seeing countries like Norway, Sweden, Finland, in which we have more willingness to pay and we have more subscription or other ways to pay digitally for the news. And in many other countries, we have instead a situation that is much more difficult. So let's say that there are new experiments, pay for the news, pay for journalism, and we are seeing first attempt to substitute the advertising market to the advertising business model of the traditional media with these new attempts. Then let's go to the other two possibilities that are in the discussion at this moment. The second possibility is money from platforms. Okay, this is very much discussed in this period and has been discussed for a while. This has two avenues. One is unilateral voluntary initiative by platforms. We have the Google Digital News Innovation Fund that invested 150 million from 2015 to 2019. We have the Facebook Journalist Project, launched in 2017, invest worldwide 300 million plus another 100 for COVID, after COVID-19. But the question is that this kind of voluntary initiative are very small. If you compare this to the value-added decrease of the media sector in the EU 28 from 2013 to 2017, similar years to these funds, that's only the value-added decrease is 3.5 billion. So you see, is a category difference between those. So voluntary contribution by platform doesn't seem a way. Clearly now we are under a different discussion, that is policy and regulatory intervention pushing platform to spread their digital revenues with, share the digital revenue with the media. Well, we know that we have the EU directive on copyright that is trying to impose an obligation of negotiate with publisher remuneration scheme. It's too soon to evaluate the results. There has been an early attempt of implementation in France, where the competition authority opened an investigation into Google's refusal to negotiate as an anti-competitive practice. In the end, this ended up through having this sort of bilateral negotiation opened by Google. And on January 21, so very recently, Google France and the Alliance de la Presse d'Information Générale agreed on a framework under which Google negotiate individual licensing deals with publishers. We don't know what does this means exactly, but there is a leak from documents seen by Reuters that has been published saying that Google will pay $76 million in 3 years to a group of 121 publishers. Again, if this is true, this is not the dimension of the problem, okay? Doesn't face the dimension of the problem. Clearly, we will see, and we are seeing with growing pressure from government regulators, other attempts of negotiation in other countries. Let's spend a minute on the Australian example. You know that this is a very important example. Australia had this new media mandatory code that obliged platforms to negotiate with publishers under the supervision of the media authority in theory. This has been fiercely opposed by Google and Facebook. In the end, there was the compromise and started the bilateral agreement. And the idea was that the bilateral agreement that publisher deals between publisher and platform will be examined before deciding if the code applies to the platform. So there was this incentive to negotiate, let's say. And we know that a negotiation has been concluded between Google and News Co, Murdoch, and also the Guardian Australia. But we don't know the financial details of these negotiations, so we don't know. However, as you probably know, there has been a lot of complaints by small editors and those small publishers and so on. And the idea that these agreements may end up favoring big players over small publishers. So there could be a very partial solution. Let me get to the final part of the talk very quickly. Public money. If good information, quality information is a public good, then public money is an issue. We know that traditionally there has been public money in the media sector, and this for public service media. And public service media have played an important role historically, but also many member states, at least in the European Union or in Europe, have a tradition of supporting also private news media through direct and indirect subsidies. There is a tradition of subsidies shrinking during the years, I have to say, but there is a sort of tradition. And after COVID, certain extraordinary subsidies have been replaced because of the situation. So we had general social protection schemes for journalists, Also, if these are easier for organized journalists in organized media, well, freelancers and others have a very different and difficult time. Emergency funds for certain media industries. There has been advertising campaign, health and so on that has been used also to finance media. Some VAT reduction, some taxes reduction, and some new funds and tax credit for digital transformation. However, let's, when we talk about public media financing through state money, we have always to remember ourselves that there is a risk of political capture, and this is a serious risk. We have this team is the use of this money and the risk of non-transparent assignments is always there. For instance, a worrisome example is the role of state advertising in Eastern countries. We have studied this a lot in the NPM, in the Media Pluralism Monitor result, and this reveals significant risks. There is the possibility of some EU level support. So could the EU, a supranational organization, support media? Well, there is in Creative Europe a budget of 60 million for 2021 to 2027, but 60 million is a very small budget, particularly if you compare this with other cultural industry funds. For instance, the film the film industry support goes into the billion. So you see there is a strong difference, and one should wonder about also this difference. What is the at this point, if this is justified and how could it be justified. I have a paper that with Alessandra Rossi who published recently, now it's coming in a book, but there is a working paper out. We suggested the possibility of European fund for investigative and local journalism, discussing the condition and underline the aspect that this difference, if a European fund can be less exposed to the political capture risk if it goes to national or even local media. So you see, there is a possibility there. There is on the same line a proposal to create an international fund for public interest media, on which there is a BBC Media Action feasibility study in 2020. This is a more international, more global idea of a fund financed by philanthropists, governments, and so on, is another possibility. So, and let me conclude also that there is an interesting combination of all this idea we were discussing in the possibility, and there is a debate on this, that the revenue of the debate, digital service tax that many governments are discussing, could be used to finance, in part, obviously, to finance news media. That could be another angle. So I come to the conclusion. The standard advertising business model to finance news media is in a deep and I think irreversible crisis. It's not the way it's still there, obviously. Media are still there, but the crisis is very serious. And try to sustain that model with tax credits could be only short-term relief. I don't think that this is a long-term solution. However, we also know that there is a common risk in the public subsidies as usual. We have the risk of political capture. So that's not an easy way either. Particularly now in which the media are economically weakened. So that could render even more risk political intervention. And some of these things we are seeing in some of the Eastern countries is also a source of a problem. But however, if information is a public good, the role of public money is clearly at stake, and funding to sustain and foster innovation and alternative business model, promoting diversity and media pluralism is an issue. So the question is, some public money could arrive and should arrive to professional journalism and quality journalism, but the question is how. and that's not an easy solution. To conclude, I think that markets, states, and civil society solutions need to be combined. We don't have a silver bullet. We need to combine solutions if we want to sustain the future of quality information in Europe. And I think we should. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much.